Okay, so let's keep talking about food here. Again, last lecture we were talking about nutritional deficiencies, malnourishment, some of the health issues, iron being the most common dietary imbalance, etc. So where do we get most of our calories from? Three key food sources. This is a huge, huge problem for our society. Worldwide, there are only three crops that we get the majority of our calories from. So based on the pictures, hopefully you guys can identify them, but let's list them out here. When we look at these, we see wheat, rice, and corn as the top three crops consumed by humans globally. This is globally now. Okay, so yeah, in Illinois we grow a lot of beans, but that doesn't make the top three when we talk about global. Consider how many billions, that's with a big B, billions of people eat rice. Central America, South America, Asia, India, lots and lots of people eat rice. Most Asian cultures and Indian cultures, etc. Rice is a main staple. Between China and India, there's over 2 billion people alone right there. When we look at calories, wheat and rice equal about 60% of the calories we consume. So huge, huge imbalance when we talk about food availability and what crops we're using to provide our calories for our society. Um, so here's a concern, or let's bring it to the US. In the US, when we look at this, corn is our number one crop. That puts soy at number 2 and wheat at number 3 when we talk about crop production. Get that out there. All right, that's in the US. Most of the corn in this country goes to either make ethanol, fuel, gasoline, blend, animal feed, or high fructose corn syrup. So let's put that into perspective here. Let me make some room so we can get those listed out because I want you guys to think about this. When we grow how many acres and acres of corn, what are we doing with it? Fuel, animal feed, and high fructose corn syrup. I want you guys to start looking at the food you eat. How much of the food you eat contains high fructose corn syrup? High calories, low nutritional value. It's a sweetener. A bottle of ketchup has this for criminy. It's in a lot of the foods we eat. So when we talk about the obesity issue, a lot of it is because of the stuff we're eating. We're consuming too many calories because it's just so easy. It's available and it's not good quality calories. That's the problem. And we'll get into environmental impact in the next lecture throughout this chapter, and we'll talk about why is this such a problem when we're pushing so much of this corn towards and soy towards fuel and animal feed instead of nutrition for people. So, all right, now what about meat? Meat production. There's definitely some pros and cons. I'm not advocating everybody go vegan. That is not something I would encourage. I don't think it's completely healthy unless you're very knowledgeable and able to balance your diet, but most of us are not knowledgeable enough and willing to balance our diet to be completely vegan and be healthy. So we do want some meat consumption. But what we want to look at is how much are we eating and how are we growing it? Again, is it healthy? Is it good quality? What's the deal? So here's just some numbers to consider when we talk about meat production. Oh, let me get that down one more. There you go. And we talk about meat consumption. average meat consumption is about 26 kilograms. So kilo is about 2.2 pounds. So multiply that by roughly 2. You're looking at 50 to 55 pounds of meat per person in a given year. All right, so this is average in today's world, what we're doing, the global population. So it's about a pound of meat a week. That's average global. Let me go back and make sure we do that. Global. Oh, I lost my L. I'll get that back in a second. Global. All right, now what's going on in the US? Because how much meat do you eat? How much do I eat? How much does each person in this class eat? On average, the average US person is eating about 136 kilograms per person per year. So multiply that by 2.2, we're looking at 136 to 280, maybe 290 pounds of meat a year, 52 weeks in a year. Ooh, now we're pushing closer to what, 4.5, 5 pounds a week of meat. Meat's good, but that's a lot of energy there. Now let's look at the pros and cons. Great source of protein, iron, fats, and other nutrients. So this is why I do not encourage not eating meat, because you need some of that. If we're going to build proteins and build muscle and build enzymes, we need the amino acids that we derive from protein. But are we getting too much? Are we eating too much? In order to produce it, meat is energetically a lot more expensive. It's environmentally horrible to produce. Well, let me back that up. Certain types of meat are environmentally horrible to produce. On average, you need about 1 kilogram of grain. I'm sorry, I'm doing this backwards here. You need about 10 kilograms of grain to produce 1 kilogram of meat. So it's about a 10-to-1 ratio when we look at the rough average. And I'm going to show you some different types of meats where you can go, okay, I want to be less than 10-to-1. Yeah, absolutely. I encourage that. I really wish everybody would move towards this. But I'll show you that in just a second here. But it is very energetically expensive to produce, to make all that steak and hamburger and pork roasts and all those things that I like them too. Lot more energy required. Here's a big issue. 1 kilogram of meat equals about 16 times more fossil fuels to produce than 1 kilogram of vegetables. So now you put that into perspective. How much gasoline does it take? That's a lot. There's a massive environmental impact there when you're raising meat versus vegetables. Okay, so all right, so here we go. Let's take a quick look at different foods, different meats. So if you're raising fish, farm-raised catfish, tilapia, etc., it takes about 1.5 pounds of grain to give you a pound of meat. Chicken, about 2-to-1. Pork, 3-to-1. Beef, 8-to-1. 8 pounds of grain to get it there. And there's variation in all of this. Not an exact, but this is why we talk about 1 pound of meat coming to our table takes about 10 pounds of grain, because this is 1 pound of grain to give you 8 pounds of cow. You're not eating the entire cow. 3 pounds of pig, you're not eating the entire pig, and so on. So that's where that 10-to-1 comes into the picture, is the average when you're talking about to the plate. This is looking at the body, the animal itself. So if I have an 800-pound cow, it took me 8,000 pounds of grain to raise that 800-pound cow. That's a big cow. A lot of meat on that cow. So, all right. So energetically expensive, environmentally just not the best thing. But again, I'm not saying don't eat meat. We want to think about where does it come from. Now, this is going to maybe turn some stomachs, and I apologize, but let's look at the facts. To produce the mass quantity of meat that we use or consume in developed countries, agricultural innovation has shifted to this confined animal feeding operations, or as I call them, CAFOs. You're cramming these animals together, packing them in, giving them an exact measurement of food every day for so many days, and then slaughtering them. So chickens, they live in those little cages. They pump them full of food. Often the food is not the best. There's nutritional issues associated with confined animal feeding operations. Sometimes the animals are pumped full of antibiotics. This is leading to diseases, that resistance, bacterial resistance, etc. We could talk about inhumane conditions for the animals to raise them that way. And then the environmental degradation produced or as a result from this. So when we have a large amount of wastes coming from our toilets at a college or at a hotel or at a city, it goes through sewage treatment processing. Animal confinements don't have to play by the same rules. Now, they can't just discharge into the river or the stream. They often have big pits where they collect all the waste. But when we get a flood, guess what happens? All that washes out. So there's different rules for them to process and deal with the wastes coming from these animals. And anybody who's been around a pig confinement, they stink. There's a lot of waste coming out of those pigs, and just environmentally not a good thing. So I encourage you guys, eat meat, eat chicken, pork, beef, etc. Buy it from a local farmer. Buy it from the guy who's raising 10 cows a year instead of 10,000. Yes, it will cost a bit more, but it's going to be better quality, better conditions, less environmental damage. Odds are they're not pumping them full of antibiotics and hormones to get them to grow faster, but that's all reflected in the price. So that goes back to our issue earlier we talked about with cheap food often is raised and grown in bad conditions that make it nutritionally not as good. So look at the chicken legs that we buy in the grocery store. They're funky, they're deformed, they're bent, they're twisted. It's because of how fast they're raising these birds. There are some birds from egg hatching, little chick, beep, 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 comes out to the time you're eating it, 8 weeks. Imagine it growing. It has to grow that fast. They literally don't walk. They just sit there, eat out of the food bowl, and poop for 8 weeks until they go to slaughter. It's crazy how we're raising food like this. Can we find ways to be healthier? So, all right. So now for those of you who are not into chicken, beef, pork, etc., let's check out seafood. All right, seafood, love it. Primary source of protein for 1.5 billion people in developing countries. So there's a large percentage of the human population that depends on seafood because they have no access to beef or chicken or pork. They can't raise those animals because of the environments that they live in. They live right on the coast. They're right on the shoreline. So they depend upon seafood for their protein. So in the next lecture, we're going to talk about seafood and look at commercial seafood and how this is working and the big concerns with global fisheries.